The crystal glasses shattered against the marble floor, the screams, the blood on the white tablecloth, and in the center of it all, amber eyes reflecting the chandelier's light, eyes that had once looked at him with the innocent curiosity of a cub. Marcus Whitmore never imagined that the creature he had saved from certain death, the being he had raised as his own child, would be the one to reveal the darkest truth about who he really was. That November night, 12 guests sat around an opulent table, unaware they were about to witness something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. What began as an elegant dinner party in a mansion worth $40 million ended with a revelation that nobody, absolutely nobody, was prepared to face. You need to understand something before we continue. This isn't just a story about a wealthy man and his exotic pet. This is a story about the thin line between love and possession, between protection and control, between the wild nature we try to tame and the savage truth we hide within ourselves. Marcus Whitmore believed he could reshape nature itself, bend it to his will, make it forget what it truly was. But nature, like truth, always finds a way to surface. And when it does, the consequences are irreversible. What you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about the bond between humans and wild animals. Because sometimes, the most dangerous predator isn't the one with fangs and claws. It's the one who believes they have the right to own another living soul. Behind the gilded walls of that mansion, behind the carefully constructed image of a philanthropist and animal lover, lay a secret so disturbing that even those who witnessed it that night refused to speak about it publicly. Only whispers remain. Only fragments of a truth too unsettling to be told in full. Here's what I need you to do. If you're ready to discover what really happened in that dining room, if you want to understand why a creature that had lived in luxury for 8 years suddenly revealed its true nature in the most shocking way possible, leave a like on this video. Let more people discover this story that challenges everything we believe about dominance, loyalty, and the price of trying to possess what was never meant to be ours. And in the comments, write, "I'm ready to uncover the hidden truth." By doing so, you're not just watching a video. You're joining a community that refuses to accept the sanitized versions of reality that others prefer to believe. Congratulations. You're here because you're not afraid to look into the shadows. You're here because you understand that the most powerful stories are the ones that make us uncomfortable, that force us to confront aspects of human nature we'd rather ignore. Get ready. What comes next contains a revelation that will forever change how you see the relationship between humans and wild animals. The clock is about to strike 8. The guests are arriving, and Raja, the magnificent Bengal tiger, is watching from the shadows of the hallway, his tail swishing slowly back and forth, waiting. 8 years earlier, Marcus Whitmore stood in the suffocating humidity of a Thai marketplace, surrounded by the stench of decay and desperation. He wasn't supposed to be there. His business trip to Bangkok should have consisted of hotel conference rooms and upscale restaurants, the usual routine of a man whose hedge fund managed $3 billion in assets. But Marcus had always harbored a fascination with the forbidden, with the exotic, with things that existed beyond the reach of ordinary people. That fascination led him down narrow alleys, where laws were merely suggestions and morality was negotiable. In a filthy cage barely large enough for a dog, he found Raja. The cub couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old, his ribs protruding through striped fur matted with his own waist. One eye was swollen shut from infection. The other looked up at Marcus with something that pierced through all his carefully constructed defenses, a look that was simultaneously pleading and resigned, as if the cub had already accepted that this cage would be both his cradle and his grave. The trader, a man with 3 missing fingers and breath that reeked of rice whiskey, quoted a price. Marcus paid triple without negotiation, not out of generosity, but because he had already decided this creature would be his. The logistics were complicated, but not impossible for a man with Marcus's resources. Falsified veterinary documents, a private cargo plane, customs officials who understood the language of unmarked envelopes. Within 72 hours, Raja was in a climate-controlled room in Marcus's Connecticut estate, being examined by a veterinarian who asked no questions because the consultation fee was equivalent to 6 months of her regular salary. She treated the infection, prescribed antibiotics, and left with instructions she knew would never be followed. Instructions about contacting wildlife authorities, about the legal and ethical implications of what Marcus was doing. Marcus told himself he had saved a life. He told himself he was different from the cruel trader in that Bangkok alley. He was giving Raja a life of luxury, of safety, of abundance. What he didn't acknowledge, what he refused to examine even in his most private thoughts, was the intoxicating rush of power that came with owning something so magnificent, so dangerous, so utterly dependent on him for survival. In the wild, Raja would have been one of nature's apex predators. In Marcus's mansion, he was a possession, a breathing, growing trophy that proved Marcus Whitmore could have anything he wanted. Those first months were intoxicating. Marcus bottle-fed Raja every 3 hours, even through the night. He watched the cub gain weight, watched the infection clear from his eye, watched his coat transform into a lustrous display of black stripes against burnt orange. Raja followed Marcus through the mansion like a puppy, tumbling over his own oversized paws, pouncing on shadows and shoelaces. The staff, the housekeeper, the groundskeeper, the chef, learned to work around the growing tiger, though Marcus noticed how they pressed themselves against walls when Raja entered a room, how their laughter at his antics always sounded slightly forced, slightly nervous. Marcus hired a big cat specialist named Dr. Yolanda Chun, a woman who had spent 2 decades working with captive wildlife before a controversial incident at a private zoo cost her that career. She was the only expert willing to work with Marcus under these circumstances, and he paid her extraordinarily well for her silence and expertise. Dr. Chin built Raja an elaborate enclosure in the estate's back acreage, 2 acres of carefully landscaped terrain with pools, climbing structures, and temperature-controlled dens. She designed enrichment activities to keep Raja's mind engaged. She insisted on protocols, boundaries, safety measures. Marcus ignored most of her advice. He wanted Raja in the house. He wanted to feel that powerful body brush against his legs while he worked at his desk. He wanted to show select visitors the magnificent creature lounging on custom-made furniture in his living room. Dr. Chen warned him repeatedly, "A tiger is not a dog. A tiger will never be domesticated. No amount of hand-raising, no degree of comfort, no quantity of affection will override millions of years of evolutionary programming." Marcus smiled and nodded and continued doing exactly as he pleased. By Raja's first birthday, the cub had transformed into a juvenile tiger weighing 200 pounds of pure muscle. His play had become rougher, more dangerous. He had shattered a Louis XVI chair during an enthusiastic game. He had knocked Marcus down the stairs once, not out of aggression but simple exuberance. Dr. Chun increased her warnings. She showed Marcus statistics about captive tiger attacks. She explained about the onset of sexual maturity, about territorial instincts, about the inevitable moment when play becomes something else entirely. Marcus assured her he understood. He assured her he had everything under control. What Marcus never told Dr. Chun, what he never told anyone, was that he had begun to need Raja, not as a companion, but as a reflection of something in himself. When business rivals challenged him, when board members questioned his decisions, when the weight of maintaining his empire became suffocating, Marcus would sit with Raja and feel centered again. He would look into those amber eyes and see his own power reflected back at him. He had conquered this wild thing. He had bent nature to his will. If he could control a Bengal tiger, he could control anything. By Raja's 3rd year, the tiger had reached full maturity, a magnificent 450 pounds of apex predator living in the carefully controlled environment of Marcus Whitmore's world. The mansion had been modified extensively to accommodate him. Reinforced doors, scratch-resistant flooring, a custom ventilation system to handle the distinct musk of a large carnivore. Marcus had spent over $2 million transforming his home into what he called a sanctuary, and what Dr. Chin privately called a gilded cage. The staff had changed entirely. The original employees had all left, some giving notice, others simply disappearing after particularly unsettling encounters with Raja. The new staff were different, younger, more desperate, willing to sign extensive liability waivers and non-disclosure agreements in exchange for salaries triple the market rate. They were people with limited options and unlimited needs. They were people who couldn't afford to ask questions or express concerns. Marcus preferred it that way. He had developed routines with Raja, patterns of interaction that he interpreted as evidence of their unique bond. Every morning, Marcus would enter Raja's nighttime enclosure, a converted ballroom with 20-foot ceilings, and the tiger would approach him with what Marcus believed was affection. Raja would rub his massive head against Marcus's chest, would allow Marcus to scratch behind his ears, would follow Marcus to the kitchen where breakfast was prepared. 2 chickens, 3 pounds of beef, vitamin supplements. Always at precisely 7:30. Dr. Chen continued her weekly visits, though her warnings had evolved from professional concern to barely concealed alarm. She had documented 3 incidents in the past year where Raja's behavior had crossed from play into something more aggressive. A swipe that had left deep scratches across Marcus's forearm. A moment when Raja had pinned him to the floor, jaws around his throat, before releasing him and walking away. A charging display that had backed one of the housekeepers into a corner until she soiled herself in terror. Each time, Marcus had an explanation. The arm scratch was accidental, a result of him moving unpredictably during play. The throat grab was gentle, a display of affection that wild tigers show to their pride members. The charge was Raja's way of establishing boundaries, something that Dr. Chen herself had said was natural behavior. Marcus heard her warnings, but filtered them through his own certainty. He knew Raja. He had raised Raja. They had a connection that transcended the ordinary relationship between human and animal. What Marcus didn't see, or chose not to see, was the change in Raja's eyes. The cub's open curiosity had evolved into something more calculating. Raja watched Marcus now with an intensity that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with assessment. Where once there had been dependence, there was now evaluation. Raja was reaching the age where, in the wild, he would be establishing his own territory, challenging other males, determining his place in the brutal hierarchy of survival. But in Marcus's mansion, there was nowhere to go. No territory to claim. Only the strange existence where his every need was met but his nature was constantly suppressed. Marcus had begun showing Raja off more frequently. Small dinner parties, where select guests would gasp and photograph as the magnificent tiger entered the room. Business associates who would leave with stories about Marcus Whitmore's audacity, his uniqueness, his willingness to live beyond conventional boundaries. Each display reinforced Marcus's sense of exceptionalism. He was not like other wealthy men with their predictable luxuries. He possessed something truly extraordinary, something wild, something that could never be fully possessed by anyone else. Dr. Chen finally delivered an ultimatum during a tense meeting in Marcus's office. Raja needed to be relocated to a proper sanctuary. The situation had become too dangerous. She had consulted with colleagues, reviewed her documentation, and concluded that it was no longer ethically or legally defensible to keep Raja in these circumstances. She would help facilitate the transition. She knew reputable facilities that could provide appropriate care. But this arrangement had to end. Marcus listened with a slight smile on his face. Then he thanked Dr. Chen for her years of service and informed her that her contract would not be renewed. He had already identified another specialist, someone younger and more flexible in their approach. Someone who understood that Raja wasn't just any tiger. He was special. The bond they shared made conventional wisdom irrelevant. Dr. Chen left that meeting knowing she had failed, understanding that something terrible was inevitable, powerless to prevent what was coming. The new specialist, a man named Derek Holloway, arrived the following week. He was in his early 30s, recently divorced, drowning in student debt from his exotic animal veterinary training. He looked at Raja with admiration rather than concern. He praised Marcus's setup, his dedication, his obvious connection with such a magnificent creature. He asked no difficult questions. He made no uncomfortable observations. He was exactly what Marcus wanted. Through it all, Raja watched. He had learned the patterns of the household, the vulnerabilities of the staff, the moments when doors were opened and attention was elsewhere. He had learned that Marcus, despite his confidence, was not truly dominant, not in the way that mattered, not in the language that Raja's instincts understood. Marcus provided food, but he was not the hunter. Marcus offered affection, but he was not the pride leader. Marcus controlled the environment, But he could not control what lived inside Raj's genes, inside his muscle memory, inside the wild heart that no amount of luxury could ever truly tame. The invitation was Marcus's idea, conceived during a board meeting where he felt his authority being subtly questioned. 5 years of consistent returns had made him wealthy beyond measure, but lately, some of the younger partners had been pushing for different strategies, challenging his decisions, forming alliances that excluded him. Marcus could feel the shift in power dynamics, could sense the whispers in hallways that went silent when he approached. He needed to remind them who he was, what he was capable of, the kind of man who played by different rules. The dinner would be intimate, 12 guests total, the most influential partners in his fund, along with their spouses. An evening showcasing not just Marcus's wealth, but his exceptionalism. The menu would be prepared by a Michelin-starred chef flown in from New York. The wines would be irreplaceable vintages from his temperature-controlled cellar. And the entertainment would be Raja, the magnificent Bengal tiger, who represented everything that Marcus Whitmore had achieved. The ability to possess the impossible, to control the uncontrollable, to exist beyond the limitations that constrained ordinary people. The staff worked for 3 weeks preparing the mansion. The formal dining room was transformed into a scene from an Arabian Nights fantasy. Silk drapes in deep gold and crimson. Crystal chandeliers that scattered light like captured stars. The custom dining table, made from a single massive slab of reclaimed teak, was set with china that cost more per plate than most people earned in a month. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled. Everything proclaimed Marcus's dominance over not just wealth, but over nature itself. Derek Holloway expressed mild concern about having Raja in the dining room during dinner, but his objections evaporated when Marcus explained the bonus that would accompany this event. They compromised on a protocol. Raja would be fed earlier in the day, well before the guests arrived. He would be introduced to the dining room while it was empty, allowed to acclimate to the space. During dinner, he would be on a reinforced lead, with Derek positioned nearby with tranquilizer equipment. It was all perfectly safe, perfectly controlled. The day before the dinner, Marcus walked through the mansion feeling a satisfaction he hadn't experienced in months. This event would reset the power dynamics. When his partners saw Raja, when they witnessed the casual way Marcus interacted with such a dangerous creature, when they understood the level of control and confidence required to live this way, their subtle challenges would evaporate. They would remember who Marcus Whitmore was. They would remember why they had invested their money, their trust, their careers in his vision. Raja seemed restless that day, pacing the corridors in a pattern that Derek noted but didn't fully understand. The tiger was approaching 8 years old, in the prime of his physical power. He weighed nearly 500 pounds now, his muscles flowing beneath his coat like steel cables covered in velvet. His canines were 4 inches of ivory designed by evolution to pierce flesh and crush bone. His retractable claws could shred through leather as easily as tissue paper. He was, in every biological sense, a perfectly evolved killing machine. And he lived in a mansion in Connecticut, sleeping on custom furniture, his every meal provided, his entire existence an ongoing contradiction of his essential nature. The night before the dinner, Marcus sat in his study with a scotch, Raja lying on the carpet near his feet. Marcus reached down and scratched the tiger's ears, feeling the vibration of Raja's purr through the floor. This was proof, wasn't it? This moment of peaceful coexistence between man and apex predator. This was evidence that his whole life's philosophy was correct, that with enough will, enough resources, enough certainty, anything could be controlled. Anyone who thought otherwise simply lacked the vision, the courage, the exceptional qualities that separated men, like Marcus, from the ordinary masses. What Marcus didn't notice was the way Raja's eyes never closed fully, even while purring. The way the tiger's muscles remained tense beneath the apparently relaxed posture. The way Raja's breathing had changed over the past weeks, becoming more irregular, more shallow, as if something was building inside him that couldn't be released through the sanitized routines of domestic life. Dr. Chen would have recognized these signs immediately. She would have called the warning signals, the behavioral precursors, to a critical incident. But Dr. Chen was gone, replaced by someone who saw what Marcus paid him to see. The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock, their luxury vehicles winding up the long driveway to Marcus's estate. November darkness had settled over Connecticut early, and the mansion glowed against the black sky like a golden jewel, every window blazing with warm light. The couples arrived in carefully calibrated fashion, not so early as to appear eager, not so late as to suggest disrespect. They were people who understood the subtle languages of power and wealth, who knew how to navigate social situations where careers could be made or destroyed over cognac and casual conversation. Jonathan and Melissa Pierce arrived first, fashionably 8 minutes late. Jonathan was Marcus's primary rival on the board, a former Wall Street prosecutor who had transitioned into private equity with ruthless efficiency. Melissa was his third wife, 20 years younger, a former model who had successfully rebranded herself as a philanthropist and art collector. They entered with practiced smiles, complimenting the decor while their eyes performed rapid calculations, assessing every detail, looking for vulnerabilities or opportunities. The others followed in succession. David Chun and his husband Robert, a power couple who managed the fund's Asian markets division. Samantha Rodriguez, the firm's chief financial officer, attending alone after her recent divorce. Thomas Westbrook and his wife Catherine, old money from Boston who had invested with Marcus's fund in its early days and now sat on multiple boards. Gregory Hammond and his partner Elizabeth, technology sector specialists who had delivered extraordinary returns in the previous quarter. And finally, Victoria Ashworth, the fund's general counsel, accompanied by her girlfriend Sarah, a trauma surgeon at Yale New Haven Hospital. Marcus greeted them in the entrance hall, impeccable in a custom Tom Ford suit, his silver hair swept back in a style that made him look distinguished rather than aged. He was 63, but carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with money, intelligence, or sheer force of will. He guided them through the mansion toward the formal dining room, providing a tour that was designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. The art collection alone was worth $40 million. Rothkos and Richters on the walls, a Giacometti sculpture in the hallway, a Jeff Koons balloon dog in conservatory. Marcus described each acquisition with the casual precision of someone discussing trading strategies, purchase price, current valuation, the story behind the acquisition. His guests listened with appropriate appreciation, though several were privately calculating whether Marcus's art budget represented sound financial judgment or dangerous excess. As they approached the dining room, Marcus paused. He turned to face his guests with a smile that contained both warmth and challenge. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a man accustomed to holding audiences, "I want to prepare you for something extraordinary. As you know, I've always believed in living beyond conventional boundaries. Tonight, you'll have the privilege of meeting someone who represents that philosophy. His name is Raja, and he is, without question, the most magnificent creature I've ever encountered." The guests exchanged glances. Marcus's affection for his exotic pet was known within their circles, though most had assumed the stories were exaggerated. Tigers in Connecticut mansions seemed like the kind of urban legend that circulated among the wealthy, provocative rumors that contained more fantasy than fact. Now, as Marcus opened the massive doors to the dining room, they realized the stories had been entirely accurate. Raja was already there, positioned in the corner of the room on a raised platform that gave him a vantage point over the entire space. The tiger was lying down but alert, his enormous head raised, amber eyes tracking each person as they entered. The effect was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Several of the guests actually stopped walking, their bodies responding to millions of years of evolutionary programming that screamed predator, danger, run. The cognitive dissonance of encountering an apex predator in a formal dining room, surrounded by crystal and china and priceless art, created a dreamlike unreality to the scene. "Everyone meet Raja," Marcus said, his voice filled with proprietary pride. "Raja, we have guests." The tiger's response was to yawn, revealing teeth that seemed impossibly large, a mouth that could easily encompass a human head. Derek Holloway stood near Raja's platform, trying to appear casual, while his hand remained close to the equipment bag containing tranquilizer darts. He smiled reassuringly at the guests, though his smile looked more nervous than comforting. Marcus guided his guests to their seats, orchestrating the arrangement with deliberate strategy. He positioned himself at the head of the table, naturally, with Raja's platform in his direct line of sight. Jonathan and Melissa Pierce were to his right, David Chun and Robert to his left. The others filled in the remaining seats, all of them trying to appear relaxed, while hyper-aware of the 500-pound predator watching from across the room. Champagne was served, Dom Perignon Rose 2002, poured into baccarat flutes by staff members who moved with practiced efficiency despite the palpable tension in the room. Marcus raised his glass in a toast. "To exceptional experiences," he said, his eyes moving deliberately across each face. "To living without fear. To understanding that the greatest rewards come to those willing to embrace risk." The glasses clinked with crystalline purity, but several of his guests noticed how their hands trembled slightly, how the champagne rippled in their glasses. The meal began with Nova Scotia lobster, each tail precisely prepared and arranged on beds of microgreens and edible flowers. The presentation was museum quality, the kind of cuisine that appeared in glossy magazines and television programs about how the other half lived. Marcus watched his guests with satisfaction as they attempted to maintain sophisticated dinner conversation while a tiger observed from 12 feet away. He could see them struggling with the cognitive dissonance, trying to process fear and awe and social obligation simultaneously. "The key to working with Raja," Marcus explained as the first course was served, "is understanding that dominance is psychological, not physical. Many people assume that controlling a creature like this requires force or restraints. But Raja and I have something deeper, a mutual respect, a connection that transcends the usual relationship between human and animal." He said this while looking directly at Jonathan Pierce, letting the subtext hang in the air. Those who understand power don't need to announce it. They simply embody it. Jonathan responded with his prosecutor's smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Fascinating, Marcus. Though I imagine it takes extraordinary resources to maintain such a, shall we say, unconventional living arrangement. The insurance alone must be prohibitive." It was a subtle dig, the kind of comment that could be interpreted as innocent curiosity or calculated challenge, depending on the listener's perspective. "Some things," Marcus replied smoothly, "are beyond insurance, beyond conventional risk assessment. That's the difference between those who achieve the extraordinary and those who remain bound by ordinary limitations." He picked up his fork, deliberately turning his back to Raja to emphasize his complete lack of concern. "Besides, Raja isn't a risk. He's family." Melissa Pierce, who had been silent until now, surprised everyone by addressing the tiger directly. "He's absolutely magnificent, Marcus. I can't imagine what it must be like to share your space with something so primal, so powerful. Doesn't it ever frighten you?" Her tone was curious rather than challenging, but Marcus heard the underlying question. "Are you perhaps mad?" "Fear," Marcus said, "is simply a failure of understanding. People fear tigers because they don't understand them. They see only the capacity for violence, not the complexity, the intelligence, the emotional depth. Raja knows me, trusts me. We've built something together that most people could never comprehend." As if on cue, Raja shifted position on his platform, his massive body creating a sound like leather furniture being rearranged. Several guests flinched involuntarily. The conversation continued with forced normalcy as the first course plates were cleared and the second course arrived, pan-seared foie gras with fig reduction and toasted brioche. The chef had outdone himself, but several guests found themselves unable to eat with any real appetite. Their bodies were in conflict, attempting to enjoy an exquisite meal while remaining on high alert for signs of danger. Sarah, the trauma surgeon, kept glancing at Raja with professional interest mixed with medical concern. She had treated enough exotic animal attacks to understand exactly what those teeth and claws could do to human tissue. The thought of being trapped in this room if something went wrong made her throat tighten. Marcus continued to dominate the conversation, moving seamlessly from Raja to discussions of the fund's performance, to observations about the current political climate, to predictions about emerging markets. He was performing, showcasing not just his wealth but his intellectual range, his vision, his authority. And all the while, Raja watched. The tiger's eyes moved from person to person, his tail swishing occasionally in a rhythm that Derek Holloway was beginning to find concerning. Derek had fed Raja earlier that day, just as planned. A full meal, 20 pounds of raw meat, bones included for enrichment. By all reasonable expectations, the tiger should be satiated, perhaps even drowsy. Instead, Raja seemed increasingly alert, his posture shifting from relaxed to attentive, to something that Derek's training recognized as anticipatory. The tiger wasn't looking at Marcus anymore. He was scanning the room, his focus moving from guest to guest with an intensity that suggested calculation rather than mere curiosity. When the third course arrived, butter-poached halibut with truffle essence and asparagus tips, Thomas Westbrook attempted to change the subject to something safer than tigers and dominance. He asked about Catherine's recent trip to the Venice Biennale, and she launched into a description of the installations they had seen. For several minutes, the conversation achieved a kind of normalcy, as if they were simply wealthy people enjoying an elegant meal rather than dinner guests in the presence of a predator. That's when Raja stood up. The movement was fluid, powerful, his full size suddenly apparent as he rose to his feet on the platform. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to the tiger. Marcus smiled, interpreting the movement as Raja responding to the sound of voices, perhaps wanting to be closer to the group. "He's just stretching," Marcus said casually. "Raja, sit." The tiger did not sit. Instead, he stepped down from the platform, his paws making no sound on the Persian carpet. Derek Holloway immediately tensed, his hand moving toward his equipment bag. "Marcus," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "perhaps we should." "It's fine," Marcus interrupted, his tone allowing no disagreement. "Raja simply wants to be part of the gathering. It's natural. He's social." Marcus stood and walked toward the tiger, demonstrating his confidence, his control, his absolute certainty that Raja would never hurt him. He reached out and placed his hand on Raja's massive head, scratching behind the ears as he had done thousands of times before. "See, perfectly safe." The shift happened in the space between heartbeats, in that infinitesimal moment when reality pivots from one state to another with no warning, no transition, no opportunity to prepare. 1 second, Marcus was standing beside Raja, his hand on the tiger's head, demonstrating his mastery. The next second, Raja's entire body language transformed. His ears flattened against his skull, his lips pulled back to expose teeth that seemed impossibly large, impossibly white against the pink of his gums. A sound emerged from deep in his chest, not a roar, but something more terrifying, a low, vibrating growl that humans instinctively recognize as a death warning. Marcus froze. His hand was still resting on Raja's head, but suddenly that casual touch felt like a catastrophic mistake, like resting your hand on a live electrical wire. He could feel the transformation happening beneath his palm, muscles tensing, body coiling, every system preparing for explosive action. "Raja," he said, and for the first time that evening, there was uncertainty in his voice. "Easy, boy. Everything's okay." But everything was not okay. Derek Holloway was already moving, abandoning all pretense of casual supervision, reaching for his equipment bag with hands that shook despite his training. He had the tranquilizer rifle out in seconds, but loading the dart required movements that seemed to take forever, each action happening in a terrible slow motion while the situation deteriorated with frightening speed. The guests remained frozen in their chairs, their evolved brains screaming at them to run, while their social conditioning kept them paralyzed, uncertain whether movement would trigger the attack they all suddenly knew was coming. Raja took a step forward, and Marcus instinctively stepped back. That was his second mistake. The first had been touching Raja at all. The second was showing weakness, showing prey behavior, activating something in Raja's brain that had been waiting 8 years to fully express itself. The tiger's golden eyes locked onto Marcus with an intensity that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with something far more primal. For 8 years, Raja had lived in this strange liminal space between wild and domestic, between predator and pet. In that moment, watching Marcus retreat, something fundamental reasserted itself. "Nobody move," Derek said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the circumstances. He had the rifle loaded now, but the angle was wrong, the risk too high. If he missed, if the tranquilizer failed to take effect quickly enough, if anything went wrong, there were 12 potential victims in this room. Marcus, very slowly. I need you to move to your left. Give me a clear shot. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was staring at Raja with an expression that mixed fear and betrayal and disbelief in equal measure. This wasn't possible. This wasn't how their story was supposed to unfold. He had saved Raja. He had raised him, provided for him, loved him. They had a bond. 8 years of daily interaction, of shared space, of mutual trust. This couldn't be happening. His mind simply could not process that the creature looking at him with such predatory focus was the same cub he had bottle-fed, the same juvenile he had played with, the same magnificent animal he had shown off to guests as proof of his exceptional nature. Raja. He tried again, putting authority in his voice, trying to reassert the dominance he believed he had established. Sit. Now. It was the tone he used in boardrooms, when lesser men needed to be reminded of their place. It was the voice of command, of certainty, of absolute authority. Raja's response was to charge. Not an attack, not yet, but a display. An explosive burst of movement that closed the distance between them to less than 3 feet in a fraction of a second. Marcus stumbled backward, his legs hitting the edge of the dining table, the carefully arranged place settings jumping as he crashed against the teak surface. A wine glass tipped over, spilling Chateau Latour 1982 across the white tablecloth like a spreading bloodstain. The sound of crystals shattering against the floor seemed obscenely loud in the terrible silence that followed. Someone screamed. Later, nobody could remember who. One of the wives, perhaps, or maybe it was Robert, David Chen's husband, who had never wanted to attend this dinner in the first place. The sound broke the paralysis that had gripped the room. Sarah, the trauma surgeon, was already on her feet, her medical training overriding social convention. She was calculating distances, exits, the physics of survival. Victoria Ashworth grabbed her girlfriend's hand with desperate strength. Gregory Hammond pushed Elizabeth toward the door while simultaneously moving to shield her with his body. Derek Holloway raised the tranquilizer rifle, but his hands were shaking now, the adrenaline that had kept them steady during the loading process now causing them to tremble with the surge of pure terror. "I need everyone to evacuate," he said, his voice higher than he intended. "Slowly. Nobody run. Move toward the exit while keeping your eyes on Raja." But Raja wasn't interested in the guests anymore. His entire focus had narrowed to Marcus, who was still pressed against the table, his expensive suit jacket riding up his back, his perfectly styled hair disheveled. For the first time in 8 years, Marcus understood something crucial that Dr. Chen had tried to tell him repeatedly. He had never been Raja's master. He had been Raja's keeper, his provider, perhaps even his friend in whatever limited way such friendship could exist between species. But he had never been dominant. He had simply been tolerated. And now, for reasons Marcus's civilized brain couldn't fully comprehend, that tolerance had ended. The tiger took another step forward, and this time Marcus could smell him, the musk of his breath, the wild scent that no amount of domestic living could ever truly eliminate. Raja's ears were still flat, his pupils dilated, his entire body radiating focused intention. And in that moment, Marcus saw something in those amber eyes that shattered everything he had built his life upon. He saw recognition, yes. He saw 8 years of shared history. But he also saw hunger. Not for food. Raja had been fed. This was something else. This was the hunger to assert dominance, to establish territory, to finally express the truth that had been suppressed for so long. Marcus Whitmore was not special. He was not exceptional. He was simply another man who had confused wealth with wisdom, control with connection, possession with respect. What happened next lasted perhaps 15 seconds, though everyone who witnessed it would later describe it as feeling much longer. Time stretching and distorting the way it does when the brain is processing information too traumatic, too surreal to integrate at normal speed. Raja lunged forward with a movement so fast that human eyes could barely track it. But he didn't attack. Instead, he pinned Marcus to the table, one massive paw on Marcus's chest, claws partially extended to hold him in place. The sound Marcus made wasn't quite a scream. It was something more primal, a noise that human throats make only when confronted with their own imminent destruction. The weight was crushing. Marcus felt his ribs compress, felt the air forced from his lungs, felt the sharp points of claws pressing against his sternum through his Tom Ford shirt. Raja's face was inches from his own, close enough that Marcus could see his own terrified reflection in the tiger's golden eyes. Raja's mouth opened, and Marcus stared into a cavern of teeth designed by evolution to kill efficiently. The tiger's breath was hot against his face, carrying the scent of raw meat and something else, something wild and ancient that didn't belong in this room of silk draperies and crystal chandeliers. And then Raja did something that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. Instead of biting, instead of completing the kill that his body language had promised, he paused. His jaws were open, positioned around Marcus's throat, but not closing, just holding, just demonstrating. And in that frozen moment, Marcus understood what was happening. This wasn't an attack. This was a message. Raja was showing him, showing everyone, that he could kill Marcus anytime he chose, that he had always possessed this power, that every moment of their 8 years together, every touch, every interaction, every demonstration of affection, had been permitted only because Raja chose to allow it. The tiger wasn't trying to hurt Marcus. He was correcting him, educating him, revealing the truth about their relationship in the most visceral way possible. "You are not my master," Raja was saying in the language that mattered. "You have never been my master. I am what I am, and no amount of bottle feeding, no quantity of custom furniture, no degree of wealthy delusion will ever change that fundamental reality." Derek had the rifle aimed, his finger on the trigger, but something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was recognition that Raja wasn't actually attacking. Perhaps it was the understanding that tranquilizing the tiger while he was literally holding Marcus's throat in his jaws might cause the exact violence they were trying to prevent. Perhaps it was simply shock, the paralysis that comes from witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. A dinner party transformed into a nature documentary's most nightmarish moment. The guests were against the walls now, some having made it to the doorway, others too terrified to move that far, all of them watching with expressions of horror and fascination as this drama played out. Samantha Rodriguez was openly crying. Thomas Westbrook had his arms around Catherine, who looked like she might faint. Jonathan Pierce, for all his prosecutor's composure, had gone pale, his carefully maintained social mask completely shattered. Then Raja released Marcus. The tiger stepped back, removing his paw from Marcus's chest, his jaws from around Marcus's throat. Marcus gasped, dragging air into his compressed lungs, his entire body shaking with adrenaline and terror, and the profound shock of understanding how close he had just come to death. He could feel wetness spreading across his lap, the humiliation of his bladder releasing, the ultimate surrender of bodily control that happens when confronted with genuine mortal threat. But the ordeal wasn't over. Raja didn't retreat. Instead, he positioned himself between Marcus and the door, blocking the exit. His body language had changed again, no longer aggressive, but not friendly either. He was alert, watchful, his tail swishing in that rhythm that Derek finally recognized as anticipatory behavior. The tiger was waiting for something, expecting something, and Derek, with his years of experience working with captive animals, suddenly understood what was about to happen. "Oh God," Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's going to." Raja turned toward the huddled guests near the doorway, not with aggression, exactly, but with focused attention. His pupils were dilated, his breathing had changed, and every muscle in his body was tensed in preparation for explosive movement. This was no longer about Marcus. This was about something deeper, something that had been building in Raja for months, perhaps years. The tiger was tired of being contained, tired of the mansion, the routines, the endless suppression of everything he was meant to be. And now, with the social order of this strange domestic arrangement completely shattered, something else was emerging. Samantha Rodriguez made the fatal mistake of running. Her instincts overrode her rational mind, and she broke for the door, her high heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor. The sound, the movement, the display of prey behavior, it activated something in Raja that no amount of domestic conditioning could suppress. The tiger launched himself after her with a speed that defied his massive size. Derek Holloway fired the tranquilizer rifle, but the dart went wide, hitting the doorframe instead of Raj's flank. What saved Samantha's life was Sarah, the trauma surgeon. She had remained close to the doorway, her medical training keeping her analytical even in crisis. She grabbed Samantha by the arm and pulled her sideways, out of Raj's direct path, while simultaneously grabbing a chair and throwing it into the tiger's trajectory. Raja crashed into the chair with enough force to splinter the antique wood, the impact breaking his momentum just enough to prevent him from reaching Samantha. Derek fired again. This time the dart hit its target, embedding itself in Raja's shoulder. But tranquilizers don't work instantly, especially on a 500-pound tiger flooded with adrenaline. Raja turned toward Derek with a snarl that raised hair on the backs of every person in that room. The tiger began moving toward him, not quickly, but with terrifying inevitability. Derek's hands were shaking so badly now that he couldn't load another dart. He backed toward the corner, realizing with crystal clarity that he had about 15 seconds before the largest predator in the room killed him. It was Marcus who spoke, his voice raw and broken in a way that none of his business associates had ever heard before. "Stop," he said, still lying against the table where Raja had pinned him, still shaking from the adrenaline flooding his system. "Everybody stop moving." His voice cracked on the last word, but something in his tone cut through the chaos. Perhaps it was the complete absence of the commanding confidence he usually projected. Perhaps it was the naked vulnerability, the sound of a man who had been stripped of all his carefully constructed defenses. Everyone froze. Even Raja paused in his approach toward Derek, though the tiger's attention remained locked on the young veterinarian. The tranquilizer was beginning to take effect. Raja's movements were slightly less coordinated, his eyes starting to look glassy, but he was still extremely dangerous, still capable of killing someone before the drugs pulled him under. "This is my fault," Marcus said, and the words seemed to cost him something essential. "Everything that's happening right now is because of me." He pushed himself upright, his expensive shirt torn and stained, his perfect image completely destroyed. When he touched his throat, his fingers came away with small dots of blood where Raja's teeth had pressed against the skin without breaking through. "Dr. Chen warned me. She told me this would happen, that Raja would reach a point where domestication wasn't enough anymore, where the illusion I'd built would shatter. I didn't listen because I thought I was special, because I needed to believe I could control something that was never meant to be controlled." Jonathan Pierce, still pressed against the wall with his wife, said something nobody expected. "The dinner," he said, his voice tight. "This wasn't just about showing off, was it, Marcus? You invited us here because you've been losing control at the firm. You needed to reassert your dominance, and you used Raja to do it." The silence that followed that observation was profound, because Jonathan was right, and everyone in the room suddenly understood it. This entire evening had been a performance designed to intimidate, to remind Marcus's partners of his exceptional nature, to shore up authority that had been gradually eroding. He had weaponized Raja, had used the tiger as a tool of psychological manipulation, and in doing so, he had created the exact conditions that made this situation inevitable. "I've been lying to myself," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For 8 years, I convinced myself that Raja loved me, that we had a bond. But love requires choice, and Raja never chose this life. He was 6 weeks old when I bought him from that cage, too young to survive without human intervention. I told myself I saved him, but I didn't. I just transferred him from one cage to a bigger one, a cage with silk drapes and custom furniture, but still a cage." Victoria Ashworth, the fund's general counsel, spoke up from her position near the door. Her voice was remarkably steady considering the circumstances. "Marcus, we need to focus on getting everyone out safely. You can have your existential crisis later. Right now, we need a plan that doesn't end with someone dying in this room." She was right, of course. Raja was swaying now, the tranquilizer working its way through his system, but he was also positioned between the guests and the only exit. Moving past him would require getting within striking distance of those claws, those teeth. Even drugged, even slowing down, The tiger was lethally dangerous. Derek Holloway had managed to load another dart, though his hands were still shaking. The drug will take him down completely in about 3 to 5 minutes, he said. But he could still attack during that window. We need to keep him calm. Keep him focused on something other than prey drive. Focus him on me, Marcus said. The words came out before he'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, he knew they were right. Raja, look at me. I'm here. He began moving slowly away from the table, creating distance between himself and the guests, positioning himself as the target. If Raja was going to attack anyone else in his final moments of consciousness, it would be Marcus. This was, perhaps, the first truly unselfish thing Marcus had done in their entire relationship. Raja's head swiveled toward Marcus, tracking the movement. The tiger took a step in Marcus's direction, then another. His movements were increasingly uncoordinated, his hind legs not quite responding the way they should. But his eyes remained locked on Marcus with an intensity that made it clear. Even drugged, even fading, Raja still possessed the capacity and perhaps the desire to finish what he had started. That's right, Marcus said, his voice gentler now, stripped of all its usual authority. It's just you and me, Raja, the way it's always been. Except now I understand. I finally understand. He was crying, tears running down his face, though he seemed unaware of it. You deserved better than me. You deserved to grow up in a place where you could be what you were meant to be. Instead, you got a selfish man who confused possession with love. The room watched in terrible fascination as this confession spilled out of Marcus, as if the near-death experience had broken open something he'd kept locked inside for decades. I thought I was rescuing you, he continued, talking to Raja, but really talking to everyone, confessing sins that went far beyond his treatment of one tiger. But I was just feeding my own ego, proving I could own something that nobody else could own. You were a trophy, Raja. I'm so sorry. You were always just a trophy. Raja took another wobbling step toward Marcus. Then his front legs buckled. The tiger caught himself, shook his massive head as if trying to clear it, but the drugs were winning now. His eyes were having trouble focusing. His breathing had slowed. When he tried to take another step, his coordination failed completely, and he collapsed onto his side with a sound like a heavy carpet being dropped. For a moment, nobody moved. The tiger was down but breathing, his sides rising and falling with the deep, slow rhythm of sedation. Derek approached cautiously, checked Raja's vital signs, and nodded. He's out, fully sedated. He'll be unconscious for at least 4 hours. The exodus happened rapidly. The guests filed out of the dining room with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to something that might have been pity. Nobody spoke to Marcus as they left. What could they say? What words existed for a dinner party that had ended with everyone confronting the darkest truths about power, control, and the lies wealthy people tell themselves to justify their desires? Jonathan Pierce paused in the doorway, looking back at Marcus, who stood alone in the ruined dining room, his tiger unconscious on the floor beside him. The board will want your resignation, Jonathan said, his prosecutor's voice devoid of emotion. After tonight, there's no other option. It wasn't stated as a threat or even as revenge. It was simply a factual observation about consequences. The house emptied quickly after that. 12 guests who had arrived expecting an elegant evening left traumatized, some in shock, several crying openly as they reached their cars. The dinner party that was supposed to establish Marcus's dominance had instead exposed him completely, not as exceptional, but as someone willing to risk other people's lives to maintain his own ego. Word would spread through their social and professional circles by morning. By afternoon, it would be industry-wide news. By evening, Marcus Whitmore would be professionally destroyed. Derek Holloway stayed, though only because someone needed to monitor Raja through the sedation. He sat on the floor beside the unconscious tiger, occasionally checking vital signs while carefully avoiding looking at Marcus. The silence between them was profound. Finally, Derek spoke without looking up. I should have listened to Dr. Chun. I knew her reputation. Knew she left your employment because she couldn't ethically continue. But I needed the money. The salary you paid me was 10 times what I could make anywhere else. So I told myself you knew what you were doing, that you and Raja had something special. I lied to myself because it was profitable to do so. Marcus said nothing. What response could he offer? Derek was confessing to the same moral failure that Marcus was drowning in, the willingness to compromise principle for personal gain. They were mirrors of each other, and Marcus had no comfort to offer because he had none for himself. What happens now? Derek finally asked. To Raja, I mean. You can't keep him here. Not after tonight. Even if you wanted to. No veterinarian would work with you. No insurance company would cover you. And the authorities will be involved. I guarantee at least one of your guests will report this. Connecticut Fish and Wildlife will come. Maybe the USDA. You're going to lose him. I know, Marcus said. His voice was hollow, scraped clean of everything that had once filled it: confidence, certainty, command. I've already contacted the Wildlife Rescue Coalition. They have a sanctuary in Colorado, over 300 acres. They've agreed to take him immediately. They were remarkably understanding. Apparently, this happens more often than people realize. Wealthy individuals who acquire exotic animals convince themselves they can provide adequate care, then face reality when the animal matures. When will they come for him? Derek asked. Tomorrow. They're sending a specialized transport team. Raja will be sedated for the journey. When he wakes up, he'll be in a space designed for tigers. Other tigers nearby. Room to run, to hunt, to express the behaviors that I spent 8 years suppressing. Marcus's voice cracked. He'll finally get to be what he was meant to be. Derek nodded slowly, still stroking Raja's side. For what it's worth, Marcus, I think you genuinely did love him. In your own way. You just loved the idea of him more than the reality of him. You loved what he represented to you. Proof of your exceptionalism. Evidence of your ability to control nature. The actual creature, with his actual needs, got lost in all that. That doesn't make it better, Marcus said. Understanding why I did wrong doesn't undo the wrong. Raja spent 8 years in captivity because of my ego, because I needed him to validate my sense of being special. And tonight, he tried to show me the truth in the only language that mattered, the language of predator and prey. He tried to teach me that no amount of money, no degree of confidence, no strength of will can override reality. I just hope he finds peace in Colorado. I hope he can forget the years he wasted with me. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound Raja's deep, steady breathing. The tiger looked almost peaceful in unconsciousness, his face relaxed, his powerful body loose, without the tension of suppressing his nature, without the constant stress of living in an environment fundamentally wrong for a species. Raja looked almost like the cub Marcus had first seen in that Bangkok cage, vulnerable, innocent, deserving of protection. Except now, finally, Raja would get the protection he actually needed, not from danger, but from the well-intentioned selfishness of humans who confused their desires with the animal's needs. Not from other predators, but from people like Marcus who weaponized love to justify possession. As dawn broke over Connecticut, casting pale light through the mansion's windows, Marcus made a series of phone calls to his attorney, instructing him to draft a letter of resignation from the firm, to his accountant, requesting information about liquidating assets, to the Wildlife Rescue Coalition, confirming the transport details and establishing a trust fund for Raja's lifetime care. $5 million, more than enough to ensure the tiger would want for nothing in his new home. The final call was to Dr. Yolanda Chen. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious when she recognized the number. Dr. Chen, Marcus said, I owe you an apology. You tried to tell me. Years ago, you tried to explain that what I was doing was wrong, that Raja deserved better. I didn't listen. I couldn't listen, because hearing you would have meant admitting that I wasn't special, that I was just another wealthy man, treating a living creature like a status symbol. I'm calling to tell you that you were right, about everything, and to ask if you would be willing to oversee Raja's transition to the sanctuary, to make sure he adjusts well, to be the advocate he should have had from the beginning. There was a long pause before Dr. Chen responded. When she did, her voice was sad but not unkind. I'll help Raja, Marcus, but not for you. I'll do it for him, Because he deserves someone who puts his welfare first. That's what should have happened 8 years ago. I'm glad you finally understood that, even if the cost of understanding was almost catastrophic. Thank you, Marcus said. And Dr. Chen, you were right about something else too. About me. You said once that I was more dangerous than the tiger because I had the capacity for self-delusion. I proved you correct in the most devastating way possible. When he ended the call, Marcus walked back to the dining room, where Derek was still monitoring Raja. The room looked like a crime scene. Overturned chairs, shattered glass, wine stains on the carpet, the massive form of an unconscious tiger in the center of it all. This was the truth beneath the silk drapes and crystal chandeliers. This was reality asserting itself over the carefully constructed fantasy that wealth could buy exemption from natural law. The transport team will be here at 2 o'clock, Marcus told Derek. Until then, we keep him comfortable. We owe him that much, at least. Derek nodded, and the two men settled into wait, keeping vigil over the magnificent creature who had almost killed them both in his desperate attempt to communicate a truth that should never have needed such violent expression. Freedom cannot be bought, wildness cannot be tamed, and love without respect is just another word for captivity. 3 months have passed since that November night, and the ripples of what happened in Marcus Whitmore's dining room continue to spread outward, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways both large and small. Marcus resigned from his firm the day after the dinner party, just as Jonathan Pierce had predicted. The business press covered it as a standard retirement, a wealthy man stepping away to pursue personal interests. Only 12 people know the truth about why he left, and they've all maintained silence, not out of loyalty, but because none of them want to relive that night by discussing it publicly. Marcus's Connecticut mansion is on the market, listed at $35 million. He's relocated to a modest apartment in Colorado, within driving distance of the sanctuary where Raja now lives. He visits once a week, though he never enters Raja's enclosure. He simply watches from the observation area as Raja roams 3 acres of carefully designed terrain with 4 other rescued Bengal tigers. Dr. Chen oversees the visits, ensuring that Marcus maintains appropriate boundaries, that he doesn't allow old delusions to resurface. She reports that Raja has thrived since the transfer. The tiger has gained weight, his coat has become more lustrous, and his behavior has normalized in remarkable ways. He socializes with the other tigers, establishes territory, engages in hunting games with enrichment items designed to stimulate his predatory instincts. Most tellingly, when Marcus appears at the observation window, Raja shows no particular recognition or interest. He looks through Marcus the way one might look through a stranger, acknowledging presence without assigning significance. This, Dr. Chen has told Marcus, is the kindest outcome. Raja has moved on. The tiger has no capacity for grudges or forgiveness in the human sense. He simply exists in his new reality, which is infinitely better than his previous one, and that is enough. Marcus struggles with this more than he expected. He had hoped for some sign that the years they spent together meant something to Raja, some indication that their bond, however flawed, had created lasting connection. But there's nothing. Raja has returned to being simply tiger, and Marcus must learn to be simply human. The other dinner guests have dealt with their trauma in various ways. Samantha Rodriguez entered therapy and has since become an advocate for exotic animal welfare, using her experience to push for stronger legislation regarding private ownership of dangerous species. Sarah, the trauma surgeon, wrote an op-ed for the New England Journal of Medicine about the public health risks posed by exotic pet ownership, citing her dinner party experience as a cautionary tale. The Pierce family, perhaps unsurprisingly, used the incident to solidify their position at the firm, though Jonathan has privately told colleagues that the experience changed his perspective on wealth and its ethical implications. Derek Holloway left exotic animal veterinary medicine entirely. He's now working at a traditional small animal practice in Vermont, treating dogs and cats and the occasional rabbit. He says he's happier, though he still has nightmares about that moment when Raja pinned Marcus to the table, when Derek understood how close they all came to witnessing a death. He's testified before his state legislature about the need for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership, and his testimony, raw and honest about his own complicity, has been remarkably effective. Marcus himself has become something of a reluctant spokesperson for a cause he once would have dismissed as irrelevant. He's funded several wildlife sanctuaries, donated to advocacy organizations, and even testified before Congress about the psychological drivers that lead wealthy individuals to acquire exotic animals. His testimony was brutal in its self-examination, holding nothing back about his own motivations, his ego, his fundamental moral failure. Some legislators found his candor uncomfortable. Others found it valuable precisely because of its unflinching honesty. But here's what Marcus wants you to understand. What he asked me to share with you if you've watched the story all the way through. The horror of that dinner party wasn't Raja's behavior. The tiger was simply being a tiger, finally asserting his nature after years of suppression. The horror was Marcus's delusion, his willingness to risk others' safety to maintain his sense of exceptionalism. The horror was the industry of exotic animal trade that continues to exploit wealthy people's egos and endanger wild species. The horror is that versions of the story play out constantly, with animals suffering in captivity so that humans can feel special. You've stayed with the story to the end, which means you're someone who seeks truth even when it's uncomfortable. You're someone who understands that the most important lessons come from examining our worst failures rather than celebrating our successes. I want you to do something for me. In the comments, right? This story changed how I see the human desire for control. By writing that phrase, you're acknowledging that you've really heard what this story was trying to tell you. You're part of a community that refuses to accept easy narratives about human superiority over nature. And here's the crucial thing I need you to understand. Sharing this story matters. There are millions of people who romanticize exotic animal ownership, who see images on social media of celebrities posing with tigers or chimpanzees, and think those animals are happy, loved, living good lives. They don't see the suppressed instincts, the psychological damage, the inevitable moment when nature reasserts itself. By sharing this video, you're helping to change that narrative. You're helping to save animals from the fate Raja endured for 8 years. Subscribe to this channel if you want to continue exploring these uncomfortable truths. The stories that reveal the darkness in human behavior, the mysteries that challenge our assumptions, the cases that force us to confront aspects of ourselves we'd rather ignore. This community exists for people brave enough to look directly at reality, no matter how unsettling it becomes. We don't offer comfortable narratives or easy answers. We offer truth, even when truth is painful. Before you go, I want to leave you with something Marcus said during our last conversation. He was watching Raja through the observation window at the sanctuary, watching this magnificent creature interact with other tigers in a way that was impossible in the Connecticut mansion. He said, "For 8 years, I thought I was giving Raja the best life possible, but the best life I could offer was still a tragedy compared to what he deserved. The greatest gift I ever gave him was the gift I should have given at the beginning, the gift of letting him be what he was, not what I needed him to be." Let that sink in. Think about the things in your own life that you're trying to control, the relationships where you're confusing love with possession, the situations where your ego is disguising itself as benevolence. We all have our versions of Raja, aspects of life or relationships where we've convinced ourselves that our control is beneficial when it's actually destructive. This story isn't just about a millionaire and a tiger. It's about the human tendency to dominate, to possess, to reshape reality according to our desires rather than accepting it as it actually exists. Watch the next video this channel recommends. Continue your journey into these uncomfortable truths. Each story we tell here is designed to peel back another layer of the carefully constructed narratives we use to avoid confronting difficult realities. You've proven you have the courage to face these stories. Don't stop now. The next mystery is waiting. The next revelation is ready to challenge everything you think you know. And remember, the most dangerous cages are the ones we build without realizing we're building them. The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. The most dangerous monsters are the ones we see in the mirror when we finally have the courage to look honestly. Raja was never the monster in this story. He was simply a tiger, trying to be a tiger, trapped in a situation that denied his essential nature. The real monster was the delusion that money and willpower could overcome biology, that desire could substitute for respect, that possession could masquerade as love. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for seeking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Together, we're building something important. A space where difficult questions can be asked, where unsettling answers can be explored, where the darkness in human nature can be examined without judgment but with absolute honesty. Stay curious, stay brave, and keep watching, because the truth is always more complicated, more fascinating, and more important than the comfortable lies we're offered every day.